Anger is never what it shows itself to be. It's the final currency of unspoken grief. The tremor beneath your voice when you couldn't name the wound. The echo of all the moments you swallowed clarity just to keep someone else comfortable. And though it looks like rage directed outward, it's always aimed inward at the voice you stifled. Because when you couldn't say, "That hurt me," you learned to stay silent. When you couldn't say, "Please don't use that tone," you learned to shrink. And so anger became your only means to speak what shame had gagged. I mattered. My boundaries mattered. I am not erasing myself again. And now every conflict becomes slanted. Can't they see? Underneath the words is the ache of invisibility. Why won't they stop? Isn't about control. It's about wounded justice, a yearning for acknowledgement you were never allowed. But anger unchecked becomes punishment. It becomes a trap. You punish them for what you couldn't say, for what you couldn't ask. But in that punishment, you prolong the silence. You recreate the distance. You confirm the old messaging. When I open my mouth, they leave. So why bother speaking? Here's the paradox. The louder anger shouts, the more desperately it begs to be heard, but it's speaking past the listener. You erupt, but your truth fractures under your own volume. You think they're feeling your pain. They're not. They're fearing it. And the moment they fear it, they shut you out even more. So what if the real work isn't in expressing, but in expressing with things that won't blow up? What if you delivered the same pain through clarity, not confrontation, through principles, not punishment? It begins this way. You sit with the flame behind your anger, and you ask a different question. What do I fear will happen if I speak calmly? You don't ask if you should speak, you ask how. Because the silence taught you method acting. But you've grown enough to know method acting always cracks. Maybe you fear being dismissed, being minimized, being told you're too sensitive, so you learn to speak with force, to claim space with volume. But force is a hammer. It builds nothing. It just keeps distance. So you learn to craft words that honor your fire, but carry a bridge, not a wall. You say, "When you did that, I deflated inside." Not to blame, just to inform. You say, "I'm angry not because you hurt me, but because I need to stop hurting myself by ignoring this." You speak your pain like a surgeon, not to wound them, but to cleanse it in the open air. This doesn't erase tension. It reframes it. It allows them to see your soft edges, not just your sharp ones. It shows your heart. Under your anger, exposed, human, hurt, healing. They might not understand. Some will walk away. But you'll walk closer to the only person whose voice matters, you. This is the alchemy of anger. You transform punishment into message, blame into boundary, rage into invitation for understanding, for compassion, for real connection. And when you do that, when your anger becomes your advocate, things shift. The space between you changes, not because your words were weaponized, but because your humanity finally got through. Because they could feel collaboration behind the strength, not compliance. You're not just showing them that they hurt you. You're showing them what you'll stand for now. This is love that doesn't collapse under pain. It's presence that refuses to disappear in the face of dissonance. It's the lesson your lineage needed, but nobody taught except by silence. So let the anger come, but don't end at the eruption. Let it morph. Let it become a doorway, a reminder that you will no longer remain silent, that love isn't loyalty to convenience. It's loyalty to truth, even when spoken in your own voice. And when your voice finally speaks steady, soft, unafraid, the world listens differently. Because clarity carries gravity, courage carries invitation, and you carry freedom, not the freedom to hurt, but the liberation to say what you couldn't before. And once that liberation enters the bloodstream of your being, you begin to notice what you used to miss. The micro moments when your body tenses at a harmless question, the sudden rise of heat when someone interrupts you, the quiet flood of shame when a room goes silent after your truth lands. Not because you're fragile, but because you are remembering, Not the moment someone hurt you, but the 1,000 tiny betrayals of your own voice that you normalized. And now your body doesn't want to normalize anymore. So you pause, you breathe, you feel, not to justify your anger, but to give it a name before it becomes a weapon. You ask yourself not who is to blame, but what inside me hasn't been grieved. Because anger unspoken curdles into sarcasm, into passive aggression, into resentment disguised as standards, into cynicism masked as intelligence. You begin punishing people, not for what they did, but for what you never got to say to someone else a long time ago. The friend who forgot your birthday reminds you of the parent who forgot your presence. The partner who needs space triggers the abandonment you weren't allowed to feel when your father left the room before you were done crying. The boss who corrects your work revives the voice of the teacher who humiliated your effort. And the people around you become stand-ins for ghosts. You punish them for a silence they never created. You hold them responsible for a hurt they never saw. And the longer you stay unconscious to this pattern, the deeper you carve it into your life. But here's the thing about awareness, it breaks the chain immediately. The moment you see it, you have a choice to react or to return. Return to your breath. Return to your body. Return to the version of you that no longer performs to avoid rejection, but speaks to transform it. Because now your truth doesn't need to be sharp, it just needs to be real. And realness doesn't attack. It reveals, it says, this reminds me of something I never got to say, and I'm trying not to repeat the silence. It says, I feel something heavy here, and I want to find clarity before I create more distance. It says, please be patient with me. I'm unlearning rage that used to protect me. And just like that, anger becomes intimacy. Because what you're really angry at is every time you abandoned your own truth just to feel safe. But now you're safe enough to say what's actually there. And that is where the healing begins. And as your voice begins to return to you, not as a weapon, but as a witness, you realize this. You don't just owe the truth to others. You owe it to yourself, to the child in you who sat at the dinner table in silence while the room buzzed with tension, but no one named it, to the teenager who stared into the mirror, rehearsing the confrontation she'd never get to have, to the adult who learned to nod, to please, to keep the peace at the cost of their own clarity. This is not just emotional repair, it is spiritual recovery. Because when God breathed life into Adam, he did not whisper compliance. Hebreat et spirit, Hebreat voice. And the word of God says in Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, not in the power of your silence, not in the performance of your perfection, in your words. So you begin to speak not to overpower, but to create space where your soul doesn't have to crouch, to create connections that don't require your betrayal to survive, to create alignment between what you feel and what you say. This is not rebellion. It is resurrection. It is the sound of a soul that no longer negotiates its peace just to stay included. Take Sarah, a woman who spent her 20s agreeing with everything her parents said, even when it crushed her. The career she didn't want, the man they preferred, the life she never chose. Until one day, at 32, she heard her own voice say in the quiet of her heart, this is not mine. She spoke it softly. And when she did, the entire ecosystem of her life trembled. Her father told her she was ungrateful. Her mother cried. Her friends were confused. But she stood anyway. She stopped apologizing for her anger. She turned it into language. She turned it into direction. She turned it into a map that said, this is who I really am. I will no longer pretend to be palatable just to be loved. And in that moment, she became free not from them, but from the part of herself that believed she had to stay voiceless to be worthy. This is what it means when Isaiah 61:3 speaks of giving a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. You wear your truth now like a robe, not loud, but unremovable. And the people who love you, they adjust. Not always immediately, not always gracefully, but they do. Because truth either repels or refines. And now you are no longer afraid of which it will be. You are no longer afraid of being left when you speak what you could never say. Because now you understand you were never meant to shrink in silence. You were created to speak in spirit and in truth. And now your anger has finally come home. So now that the voice has returned quiet at first, but firm in its presence, you begin to sense where else it was needed. In the hallway where your younger brother cried and you said nothing. In the room where your partner's boundary was crossed and you smoothed it over for the sake of keeping things normal. In the meetings, the dinners, the passing moments where your silence was interpreted as agreement and something inside you shrank just a little more. And here's the truth that stings before it frees. Your anger isn't just about what they did. It's about what you didn't say when it mattered most. Not out of cowardice, out of training. You were trained to keep the temperature steady, to nod when you meant no, to smile while your soul flinched. But silence, when it protects dysfunction, is not peacekeeping, it's self-betrayal. And each unspoken truth sits inside you like a seed, growing into resentment, tightening into judgment, calcifying into coldness. You think you're protecting others from your fire, but what you're really doing is smothering your own flame until it has no choice but to erupt. That's the tragedy of delayed truth. It never arrives gently. It crashes, it distorts, it punishes. And those who receive it, years too late, feel ambushed by something they never knew they were part of. So now you choose something different. You choose timely truth over toxic silence. You speak before your anger metastasizes. You say, that tone doesn't sit right with me. I know we've always done it this way, but it's hurting me. I need to pause this conversation. I'm feeling activated and don't want to lash out. And in saying it, you disrupt the old cycle. You end the lineage of unspoken pain passed down like an heirloom. You model something your ancestors never got to see. A human being who honors God not by being agreeable, but by being authentic. Because even Jesus flipped tables in the temple, not out of fury, but out of alignment. He saw the sacred space defiled, and he didn't stay quiet. He acted, he voiced, he stood in truth, not to destroy, but to restore order. That's what your anger is here for now, not to dominate, but to restore. Not to seek vengeance, but to invite alignment. And you don't need to yell. You don't need to prove. You just need to be congruent. Because congruence will do what volume never could. It will move mountains without shouting. And now that your truth has become timely, not delayed, there's one more shadow to face. The shadow of the one who taught you silence was safer. Because beneath the frustration, beneath the moments you wish you had spoken up sooner, is a deeper grief. You inherited this. You didn't just wake up afraid to speak. You watched it. You absorbed it in the quiet tension of your mother biting her tongue so your father wouldn't explode. You felt it in the way your uncle dismissed your questions with sarcasm that stung like shame. You saw it in the way people in your family substituted honesty with obligation. They didn't ask what you felt, they asked what you owed. So you learned that truth makes people uncomfortable. You learned that confrontation breaks things. You learned that honesty comes with a cost, and you weren't sure you could afford it. But now you see it for what it was. A survival strategy, a protective instinct passed down like a gospel. Don't speak, keep the peace, don't rock the boat. But peace that cost your presence is not peace, it's exile. And every time you chose comfort over truth, you weren't avoiding conflict, you were abandoning yourself. So now you reclaim what was never theirs to withhold, your right to speak with clarity. You stop asking, will this make them upset? And you start asking, will this make me whole? You stop filtering your reality through other people's moods and start calibrating your words to the frequency of freedom. You stop rehearsing yourself into someone softer and start revealing someone stronger. Because that's what clarity does. It reveals, not attacks. It says, I love you, but I will not absorb your chaos. It says, I respect you, and this is where my boundary lives. It says, this may be uncomfortable, but it's honest, and I won't trade honesty for temporary harmony anymore. And when you speak like that, the air changes, not because they agree, but because they finally meet the version of you that no longer speaks from pain, but from power. The quiet, unshakable power of someone who doesn't punish, but no longer pretends. And when you no longer pretend, when you no longer bend your truth into socially acceptable shapes, you start to see the deeper anatomy of anger. It was never about the person who cut you off in traffic. It wasn't about the friend who didn't text back. It wasn't about your partner forgetting that one detail. Those were just surface provocations for something ancient. What you were really angry about was displacement. Not just being ignored, but being made to feel invisible over and over again until the silence became unbearable. You see, when a child feels invisible, they don't get angry, they get confused. They think they are the problem. They think they must change to be noticed. But when that child becomes an adult, the confusion becomes fire. A fire that demands, see me now. But when you scream to be seen, you often blind the person in front of you. So now, you learn to do something different. You learn to claim your visibility without burning the room down. You say, I'm not okay with being overlooked here, calmly. You say, that response felt dismissive to me. You say, I want to be clear, not aggressive. Here's what I actually feel. And in those moments, you are doing what your lineage never dared, voicing without violence, standing without screaming, loving without losing yourself. This isn't softness, it's sacred rebellion. It's what Jesus meant in Matthew 5:37 when he said, let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. It means say what you mean, say it with integrity. Let your boundaries be clean, not cruel. And you practice this in the little things. When someone interrupts you and you don't let the moment pass. When a joke crosses a line and you say, that didn't sit right with me. When your intuition speaks and instead of swallowing it, you honor it. These small choices accumulate. They build an identity rooted not in reaction, but reverence. You're not angry at others anymore. You're not punishing them for your unspoken truth. You're revealing who you are clearly, calmly, consistently. And in doing so, you reclaim the one thing anger was always trying to protect, your right to be fully seen. And as the fog of blame clears, something more subtle, more sacred, begins to surface. Discernment. You stop asking, who hurt me? And start asking, what am I here to protect? Because once the fire of old anger cools, it leaves behind something stronger than rage. Vision. Vision that doesn't react, it recognizes. Vision that sees the pattern before the pain, that notices the moment someone begins to withdraw. And instead of clinging or accusing, you lean into clarity. You say, I notice you're pulling away. Can we talk about what's happening? Not to control the outcome, but to stay in alignment with your values. Honesty, transparency, presence. This is how you stop punishing others for what you couldn't say. You start saying what matters in real time. You no longer weaponize your silence. You no longer hide behind delayed truths and explosive finales. You don't wait until your soul is choking just to finally speak. You live in truthful rhythm. It's not always neat. It's not always welcome, but it's always clean. Because anger that's integrated becomes precision, not hostility, not performance, precision, like Jesus kneeling in the dust with the adulterous woman, writing in silence as the crowd demanded judgment, then saying, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. No scream, no fight, just truth delivered in its most potent form, timeless and piercing. You begin to speak like that. Your presence becomes surgical, not because you cut, but because you no longer let infection grow in the dark. And this changes everything. The way you text, the way you end conversations, the way you ask for your needs, not with apology, but with authority. Because you are no longer reliving an old fight through every new face. You are home now, not in their approval, not in their understanding, but in yourself. And from that home, you speak not to provoke, not to punish, but to protect what's holy inside you. Your peace, your power, your presence. And when your presence becomes rooted, truly rooted, you stop flinching when someone misunderstands you. You stop explaining your boundaries like they're courtroom evidence. You stop performing emotional acrobatics just to soften your no. Because a person who is anchored in truth does not need to decorate it. They live it. They become it. It's in how you enter a room, not trying to prove your worth, but embodying it. It's in how you say, I won't tolerate that. Not with venom, but with conviction. It's in how you no longer need to raise your voice, because the ground you stand on now does the speaking for you. This is where anger, once your shield, retires from duty. Not because it's gone, but because it's evolved, transformed, refined, like steel pulled from the fire, not discarded, but tempered. Now it serves you. Now it protects without punishing. It warns without wounding. It clarifies without destroying, because you finally understand the power of a voice isn't in how loud it is. It's in how true it is. And truth has a frequency that can't be faked, a tone that doesn't need theatrics. It just rings clear. Like when someone violates a boundary and you don't react, you just redirect. Like when an old trigger flares and you choose silence to reflect, not to seethe. Like when you walk away not to punish, but because the space no longer reflects your standard. This isn't avoidance. This is spiritual maturity, the kind that echoes Romans 12:18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. As far as it depends on you, not on their behavior, not on their validation, not on their apology, but on your choice to embody peace without enabling chaos. Because now you don't use anger as proof you care. You use clarity to honor your care. And care, real care, starts with how you care for the voice you once silenced just to survive. So now you no longer speak to be feared. You speak to be free. You don't seek to dominate the room. You seek to no longer disappear in it, because anger was never the enemy. The silence that bred it was, the pretending, the self-erasure, the way you taught others to treat you by treating yourself like a burden just for having needs. But you've come back for yourself now. The one who held her tongue when the room went cold. The one who smiled when her spirit fractured. The one who choked on apology after apology just to keep the connection alive. You've come back to say, I'm done punishing the world for what I was too scared to say. I'm done turning my truth into shrapnel. I'm done building intimacy on the ruins of my own voice. Because you know now, what you couldn't say before, what you weren't allowed to say, has not vanished. It's waiting. Waiting for your nervous system to feel safe enough, waiting for your soul to feel strong enough, waiting for you to decide. No more rehearsing rage. No more hiding behind tone. No more punishing others for what one person in your past never let you say. It ends here, with a sentence, with a boundary, with a truth told not in fire, but in faith. The faith that says, if I speak honestly, I will not be abandoned, I will be revealed. And those who can meet me there, they're the ones who deserve to stay. Because now you don't use anger to guard your silence. You use truth to guard your soul. And the world doesn't get the rage anymore. It gets the real you. Finally,